IVM.
Welcome to today's episode of This Round is on Me. My guest today began his career in journalism around about the time I was born. And for those of you who know, I just celebrated my 40th. That's no mean feat. He spent time with venerated publications like the Asian Wall Street Journal and The Times, but is most well known for his last stint, which has lasted an incredible 25 years. He's the Chief Food Critic at Bloomberg. He was also the UK and Ireland chair for the world's 50 best restaurants. I had the pleasure of being introduced to Richard Vines by a dear friend and chef restaurateur, Ravinder Bhogal, who, by the way, was also a guest on this podcast not too long ago. Welcome to the show, Richard. It's so great to have you here today, joining us all the way from London.
Thank you. You make me feel old, but I'm very happy in my old age.
No, that is really amazing. So, Richard, tell us, how did you become a food critic, and what made you fall in love with it? And take us through a little bit about your career and how it unfolded over this long period.
Well, like many greedy people, I've always loved food right through from my childhood and so on. But I got very lucky as a journalist. I joined Bloomberg in '95 as an editor. I was the industrial editor, in fact, at Bloomberg. I heard in 2004 they were looking for a food critic, and I volunteered for the job. They didn't advertise it, and I managed to talk my way into it. And I was just so lucky. As you will probably well know, food in London historically has been pretty terrible and started to improve quite radically in the 90s. We can talk more about that. And so 2004 was quite a good time to come into it. And I'm just clinging on to this job still, even with COVID.
Yeah, no, you're right. I actually lived in London for about 9 years between 99 and 2008. And every year that I've been back since on vacation, I just feel like, why wasn't this happening when I was back there? You're absolutely right. The whole sort of dining scenario and the food options and everything has just been so elevated over the last few years. So it really it's amazing. And it's funny that you were saying you were the industrial editor, and it sounds a bit like my life, where I was a chartered accountant and then ended up becoming a restaurateur. So I guess food is one of those things that just draws you in. And So, before we dive into the world of food and restaurants, I read somewhere about your famous encounter with Nelson Mandela. And, he's one of those people that always gets named when asked to list 10 famous people dead or alive that you'd like to invite for dinner. So but you actually met him. So tell us about it and, how it came about.
Yeah, part of my past, previous incarnation, I was the foreign editor on the South China Morning Post. And it became pretty clear a year or two before Mandela got out of jail that he was going to get out. And then I started to think, how can I meet him when he comes out? So I got to know the people at the South African Commission in Hong Kong, also got to people at South African Airways, even met somebody from the Women's League, the ANC Women's League, just tried to make all those connections a long way ahead. And then in around, I can't remember the year exactly now, but I think it was around 1990, 91, after Mandela was released, he went on a tour of Asia to raise money, and he went to Kuala Lumpur. And I got very good. I knew the people I knew the Malaysians quite well, and arranged the interview through them. So I did get to meet him. And I have to say, of all the people I met, he's as impressive as anybody I've ever met. He, don't meet your heroes. He absolutely lived up to the expectations. He was very polite, called me Mr. Vine, stood up when I went into the room, was very thoughtful. It was brilliant. Yeah, it was one of the experiences of my life, I would say.
Yeah, no, it's a treat, really. So very lucky. Let's dive into your life as a food critic and a restaurant, reviewer. What are the things that you look for when you're reviewing a restaurant? What do you judge a restaurant on?
I think about it from the start, from when I even look at the website, see how friendly the website is, first of all. And then in the old days, when you called up for a reservation, and now lots of it's online, how you treated then, right through to when you walk into the restaurant, to when you walk out of the restaurant. Of course, the food is still the main thing, but it's a whole experience, isn't it? Going out to eat is a whole kind of multi-sensory experience, of which food is one element, and I try to take all those into account. But if the food's not good, then nothing really matters.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think for me as a restaurateur, I've always said this to my team that the experience actually begins well before people enter the restaurant. And it's so important about that first communication that they have, and, whether it's online now or on the phone, as you said. So, and I think that when it comes to hospitality, even if the food is for some reason amiss, it's something that you can probably fix. But, hospitality is one of those things that you better get right from the get-go. Otherwise, people aren't very forgiving of that. So I kind of see where you're coming from. But what have been some of the biggest, challenges or, the joys of your job and, what you've experienced as a sort of food critic?
Well, some of the big challenges are getting into the really, really difficult restaurants to get into, obviously, places like El Bulli. I don't know if you ever made it there when it was open. But
no, unfortunately, I didn't. But yes, I believe it's one of your top experiences.
Yeah, one of my top. I went there for the closing month, and it was a 48-course menu, which I have to say, for courses, even for somebody greedy, 48 courses is a bit too much, I must say. Gets a bit... I'm not very good at sitting still, and I guess it's a couple of hours for dinner, but about 4 hours was probably my limit. But no, for somebody who enjoys eating, as we both do, being able to travel the world and go to restaurants from Melbourne to Lima and so on, there's so many great experiences. I'm grateful each day for this chance I get to go to places to eat. But I suppose my proudest thing is that, as I say, that London now has world-class restaurants, which it never did. I'm not one of these people who thinks that everything's great in the UK, because I don't think that at all. And I look back with embarrassment when I was younger, living in London. I went to university in London in the 1970s, and I can tell you the food. I was going to say, I don't know if you went there then, but you weren't born. The food then was not good. The restaurants weren't good. So I appreciate the changes.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think it's all heading in the right direction, which is the important thing. But coming back to your sort of the task at hand as a food critic, and when you say that it's tough to get into some of the top restaurants, do you go unannounced normally if you're doing a review? I mean, of course, surely you're recognized now by everyone in the industry. So, how does that work? Do you get special treatment? And, how do you manage to sort of stay unbiased and factor that into your reviewing process?
It's very difficult because I like restaurants, I like restaurateurs, I like chefs, and I am, at least in the UK now, I am known, and so I think I probably do get special treatment. I find it interesting, when I go abroad on holiday, I find myself sitting at some terrible table in a restaurant, and I think, how did that happen? And I thought, this is life, isn't it?
Don't they know who I am?
I went to Albania recently, last year. Actually had some very good food there. It's not somewhere you'd think to go. But sitting in the table by the loo or being ignored by the waiters and so on, I thought it was bad. I tell you where I had good experiences, I'm happy to say, was in Mumbai when I was there. And I don't think I was known in restaurants, but I went into places like Table as an example and was treated very well. So I'm, congratulations to everyone there on the standard. Thank you. But not just at the table, but generally I found the standard of service was good, which isn't something I hadn't really thought about it, but I hadn't particularly expected it, I must say.
But I think that's nicer for you, surely, because when you're not recognized and you still get good service, I think then that is that's the true test, right? So
it's so important, and some great food as well, places like Bombay Canteen and all this. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And tell me something. The reason I'm sort of prying about all this is I'm about to sort of tell you how it works in India. But does Bloomberg have a policy of paying for its meals? And
yes.
Do you think that makes a difference?
I think it's partly a question of appearance. Do you know what I mean? If you accept a meal for free, even if it's the most amazing meal and you think it's the most amazing meal, and then reading it might think, well, they got it for free, so is that what he really thinks? I think it does make a difference, but I count myself very lucky. And most news organisations, most organisations now don't have that kind of budget for these things, and so obviously don't think Bloomberg's superior or we're superior. I just think I'm so lucky to be at a company that's in that position.
Yeah, and that takes that process sort of so important. But do you ever sort of go back sort of multiple times to a restaurant before giving your final verdict? You go 3 times?
3 times before reviewing. I don't review them. We've moved now more towards doing chef interviews, restaurant reviews on, rather than rather than individual reviews, but the policy for an individual review is 3 times. I remember the first time when I just started doing this job, I didn't know that. And I went to a place in London, I don't know if you know it, it's called Sketch. It's got 3 Michelin stars. The meal for 2 cost what was almost a year's salary when I started my work. And I was appalled. And anyway, I put in my expenses. My editor contacted me. I need to speak to you about that meal at Sketch. And okay. I got on the phone just ready. And she said, can you go back 2 more times? And then I thought, okay, this is the job for me, obviously.
Wow. No, so this is why the sort of interrogation about the process, or, because I can speak for Bombay, but I think it probably applies across India, is that it's very, very different. I think, I can probably count on one hand the number of people who conduct reviews and pay for their own meals. And it's been a big issue. I mean, I've had a restaurant for 10 years. And so we've seen this, over a period of time where it's really not gotten any better. And, I sort of want to, I'll come to the question of, bloggers and, things like that, where there's this whole expectation of eating for free has almost become, it's sort of, it's expected rather than, something that is volunteered. And it really changes the level of bias that comes out. And yet, this is what's driving the business in a lot of restaurants. So it's very different here. And it's so refreshing to hear that, it does, it does happen differently, where you are. And I just hope that people understand the importance of it, because a restaurant you can make or break a restaurant by what you say about it, and just because you aren't invited for free doesn't mean that it's not a good restaurant. But it's unfortunately not as unbiased here, I would say. But like you mentioned earlier, your work has taken you all over the world. How has eating a cuisine in its native country influenced your critique of the cuisine back in the UK? So for example, I don't know how much Indian food you managed to eat while you were out here, but I know that having lived in London, what's considered Indian food there, in a lot of the sort of, more casual restaurants is not actually what you end up eating back in India. So has that influenced you at all, the more you've traveled?
Well, the Indian food, as you know, traditionally the Indian food in the UK is based around Bangladeshi chefs cooking what they think English people want, right? Which is kind of sweet and colourful stuff. I think that's all changing quite quickly. In central London, not if you live... My family live from a small town in Yorkshire. If you went to eat there, you would still eat that kind of food. But I think there's some very good Indian food in London now. And of course, I have most amazing Indian food in London, even from somewhere in India. I've been a few times. I'm not saying this because I'm speaking to you. It's my favorite cuisine, so I'm very happy to go there all the time. I'm actually wanting to get back, but of course with coronavirus, I don't know if I'll even get back this year.
Yeah.
But I've eaten very well in India, from the smallest kind of street place to the fine dining, definitely.
And do you feel that influences your opinion of the food then when you eat it back in the UK? I mean, do you feel like that's the benchmark you're applying?
Not necessarily. I think it's a bit easier for chefs once they move outside their own country to play with the cuisine a bit more. So you can get some amazing... I lived in China for 13 years. You can get some amazing Chinese food in London with a guy called Andrew Wong, a chef. He's just won his 2nd Michelin star. He says to me, Chinese people don't like his food because they'll say, you don't do that with it. And I know it's the same with Italian food. I've got Italian friends, amazing Italian food in London, but it's not necessarily what people are going to eat in Italy. And I'd say the same with Indian. Some of the chefs here have evolved it a bit. Banara's just won his Michelin star. French influence Indian food. It's certainly different from what I was eating in India, but I still think fantastic. And then restaurants, I assume you've been like, I don't know, sorry, I've just forgotten the name now, but some of the ones that come along just doing the evolved Indian food. It's so well. Jim Carno, I'm trying to think.
Yeah, of course, yeah. No, so, I mean, you're right. It's about how chefs kind of, I guess, adapt it or put their own signature to it. And speaking of Chinese food, so in India, there's a whole culture of Indian Chinese.
Yes.
And so So it's amazing, and people love it, and I've seen a lot of Chinese people go and eat that, but I believe they have a separate menu when they go in. So, but okay, moving on to another topic that obviously you've been involved with personally, awards. You were the UK chair for the World's 50 Best Awards, and in my opinion, it all hinges on the panel of jurors at the end of the day, which is picked by the chair. And since my stint with the South Asia panel is done, I can now sort of speak about it openly and reveal that I was one of the panelists. One of the biggest challenges for me was that it all depended on how much I had traveled the year before, because it's based on sort of your last 18 months of travel. And to think that something as subjective as that could decide the future of the best restaurants in the world seemed a little irrational to me. I mean, what are your thoughts on this, and how fair this whole process is?
Well, I stepped down from the panel voluntarily, yeah. I must insist, because I was uneasy about the whole thing. The panelists have got no budget to travel or to eat. So, and although they're not supposed to accept free meals, I think a lot of people are accepting free meals. And because there were no checks, I'm not saying anyone's being dishonest, but because there were no checks and that you couldn't be sure about the integrity of the whole process. And I don't know what's to be done, because nobody's got that kind of budget to pay for panels of 35 people to travel the world. But on the other hand, chefs care so much about the placing on that list. And I didn't feel confidence in the process. So I just think they need to look a lot more at what they're doing. I think one way might be even to cut the size of the panels and try and find some budget or something. But I also found part of the distortion is based on chefs. Some chefs are desperate to be on that panel, on that list, and they will go out of their way to target panelists, and they will even, I feel, kind of just, their focus will be to get on the list. So rather than the list reflecting the restaurants reflecting the list.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting perspective. And I know that restaurants spend a lot of money on the PR around this. So, in fact, I was invited again to be on the panel this year. And I actually decided, because I hadn't traveled anywhere in over a year, I just felt like it was completely unfair and definitely not the right time to be pitching, restaurants against each other. So I declined to be part of the panel. But, what do you think about awards in general, and, including the Michelin Guide, which just announced the stars, and all of these going ahead as planned this year, considering everything that's happening with the pandemic and with the industry?
Sorry to interrupt. I mean, people just love awards, don't they? Everyone loves awards. Chefs love awards. Diners love awards. I today was just looking at some London awards that are coming up, GQ, not, to be honest, not very important awards. Still fascinated to see what was on the list. And then I was thinking, that's wrong. So, I don't think, I won't say I don't take awards too seriously. I mean, I do, in the sense that Michelin star or whatever is very, very important for the chef, and these things do matter. I don't think they actually reflect necessarily what's the best restaurants, is what I mean. And I wasn't surprised Michelin went ahead this year, because it's a commercial company they're doing business, right? And their business, the restaurant, the guide section that's their business. And I thought they're not going to skip it from there just because of a little thing like coronavirus. But I don't think you can believe too much in the awards.
And does Bloomberg come out with a list as well?
No. Sometimes I used to do my top 10 in London or whatever. But as I got to friend with all the chefs and got to know everybody, I thought it's a bit of a minefield. Decided not to do it anymore. That
must be a challenge, right? Because I'm sure you've got friends in the industry, and how does that work for you in terms of?
What I do, going out for meals, I almost always go out with chefs. I decided that's the way you can learn more about food, being with chefs. You can learn more gossip about the restaurant business. I just find it more useful than just going out with friends in the normal way. And so I do that all the time. And, but of course it brings you closer to people in a way. So it would be difficult to stand back and say that's a rubbish restaurant you've just opened.
Have you ever had to do that?
No, I've kind of shown a lack of enthusiasm, I'd say. And I always think the worst criticism is constructive criticism.
Absolutely. No.
If you tell people they got it wrong, they'll say they want to hear it, but I don't think many people do want to hear that, actually.
Yeah. Speaking of the pandemic, I felt personally that, we were going to see a lot of changes possibly in the dining format going forward, and, possibly even the price points at fine dining restaurants. So whether awards and things sort of recognize this is sort of a separate point. But what are your thoughts? Are you seeing changes in the dining trends in the UK post-pandemic, or do you think that, it's a blip and we're going to go back to the way it was?
No, I don't think it'll go back to the way it was. I think there's going to be a lot more. I think there's going to be a lot more good value restaurants for a start, and I think some of the fine dining might have to even bring their prices down a bit. I don't think it's all suddenly going to be on day one when we go to restaurants, it'll be business as usual again. I think people have had a real think about everything. And I think restaurants are going to be much more aware of their costs possibly than they were. If restaurants were profitable before, depending on the restaurateur, they're just, okay, let the good times roll. But now people are going to look at every cost. And I suspect that some diners are going to be a bit stingier as well. I've saved so much money not during the pandemic. I think we're all going to be a bit more price conscious for a start. And certainly for the first few months, tables are going to be spaced. There are going to be fewer covers, aren't there? I think everyone's going to have to do that. I don't know how you feel.
It's different in different cities because it's a state mandate. But in Bombay, for example, we're only allowed 50% capacity right now, which isn't necessarily strictly being followed. But I think that the diners are expecting there to be sort of more space between restaurants, between tables, which of course means, less covers. And, I don't know how long that's going to go on for, but that is something that for sure is the case here.
And one change that's happened here as well is that restaurants are doing shorter menus generally. Right. They're trying to work out how to do something with maybe just one or two shifts of staff in the kitchen, and keeping it a lot simpler. And I, from the point of view of a restaurateur, I would think that's good news. And if diners get used to that, then that's a change you might welcome, I would guess.
Yes, except in India, everyone loves choice. You can never have enough choice. So it's a tricky one. But I think that what we are seeing is perhaps a bigger movement towards local ingredients, which may not have been as rampant previously. And, just to keep your costs low. And of course, if sourcing is easier locally, so, you're not having to buy in large quantities if it's imported. So I think, these are a few. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're seeing something similar here. And of course, delivery is taken off in a large way. So, and I think that that's here to stay. So just seeing the kind of the kind of innovation and creativity that's happening with delivery menus is also great. So,
Well, we obviously have that in a very big way here because all restaurants are closed at the moment. But also in the UK, we've got Brexit, which was, would have been a car crash without the coronavirus pandemic, making it much more complicated and more expensive potentially to import ingredients. So, that could be one of the good things, the increased use of local ingredients and supporting British farmers and producers.
Yeah. And, have you sort of seen any shift in how talent is being recognized? There's been a lot of press about women chefs and, who are deserving but not getting their due recognition, etc. I mean, is this something you agree with? Just going back to the sort of topic of awards and sort of a movement in a different direction?
It's certainly. I
saw a Michelin as well. There was a lot. There were two chefs recognized, two women chefs recognized with 3 stars. So that was amazing. But
that's a very good sign for Helen DeRose and Claire Smith at Core. I think that is the thing that's happening. I mean, what's happened in the past in the UK is there've been quite a few women in the kitchen, but they've been they haven't been at the very top level. They haven't been the face of the restaurants. And that's changing. I think we're just changing with society as a whole. And it's a bit, restaurants are behind the curve, really, a bit behind the curve. But I do see that those 2 new 3 stars, for example, as an indication of the way things are going. Some of the best known chefs in the UK now are women. And
I actually managed to dine at Core a couple of years ago. And it was, I think, one of my standout meals of that trip. It was, unfortunately, Chef Claire wasn't there that evening, but it was a fantastic dining experience.
Oh, she's almost always there. Did you have the potato, her signature dish?
No, I didn't actually. This was quite a few years ago. So I remember the apple, and no, I mean, it was. I don't remember the meal, some of the details of the meal, but I remember leaving. Just really in awe of everything and the entire experience. So.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. I feel some pride in London restaurants, even though it's nothing to do with me. I still feel some pride.
No, of course. So, coming back to the topic of bloggers and taking over the business of restaurant reviews, they wield so much influence over public opinion. But do you feel that they're really equipped to give unbiased reviews, or are they just, essentially one more customer review sort of packaged differently?
I only speak for the UK here rather than other countries. There was a time around 2009, 2010 when the bloggers were coming to the fore, and I think there's some speculation, would they compete with the professional critics who have been historically quite strong in the UK and historically still are strong. And I think that wave has passed now. That seems to some people have emerged from that blogging side into the mainstream, if you like. But as a movement, I'd say that's gone. And what's happened is that's moved across to Instagram now, where you get Instagram influencers who do very pretty pics of food, which I think they're probably better qualified to do than to write about a meal. I found the standard of writing and the insight among those blogs, I'm talking a decade ago now, was not impressive. So I think they're still not the same people necessarily, but the movement's still there, but it's changed direction. And I've been to events and sat down with somebody, no idea who they are, and then somebody tells me, they've got 200,000 followers on Instagram. I have no idea. Yeah, I'm a bit out of touch. Also, it's partly an age thing. I'm in my 60s. A lot of these people are a lot younger than me, in 20s and 30s, and I wouldn't. They're not writing or photographing for me, and I wouldn't necessarily know about them.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the thing. It's moving in the whole sort of idea of reviews is moving into a different direction, and you can't ignore the tech part of it, and that everyone's on Instagram and whatnot. So I guess it's a sign of the times, and that's how you sort of have to deal with it. But tell me something. I mean, what are some of the most important things for a budding journalist or food critic to know today before breaking into this career? What are your tips for a budding food critic?
I find people going into food writing come from two directions. One direction is from journalism, and one direction is from food. And often the people who write the best are the journalists, and some of the people who know more about the food are the I hate the word foodies, but they're the food people, that crowd. So I would, for the food crowd, I didn't urge them to try and think about how they write, because some of the writing is quite poor. Just a simple tip, keep it short. I've read some of these, when the blogs were going, I'd read 1,200, 1,500 words from people, when 400 words would be plenty and so on. And then I can't really speak for other people, but for myself, I realized my ignorance, and I still realize my ignorance. And as I say, try and learn all the time, spend time with chefs. It seems to be that's like getting the best professor. If you go out for lunch and the chef will point out why this is on the plate that way, what they've done and so on. It's such an education, which of course you don't have that option if you're a young person going in, but just read and try to learn, listen more than you speak. But that's probably my recommendation to people in life anyway.
That's some great advice there. So what are you working on now, Richard? And what's next for you?
Well, during the lockdown, obviously I can't go to restaurants. So as I say, they're all closed in the UK. There's nothing. There's nothing to be done. I do a weekly column now where I take a famous chef's recipe and cook it and write about cooking it and so on. And it's quite good because I'm not a keen home cook. In fact, I'm a very keen person going to restaurants without cooking at home. And I took some cooking lessons when I lived in Hong Kong in the early 80s. And always at home, I've just cooked stir fries and so on. But now I'm doing these recipes. So the one I'm doing this week is Nick Ekstedt, a Swedish chef, who's got a healthy eating one with some pasta with brown butter and sage. And I just spoke to him on the phone before before coming on to you, actually. So I find that quite interesting. I'm learning new skills and still working with chefs, and I like that. And I am going to do a review called by Claire Smith. Claire does a home delivery meal. I'm going to do that in a couple of weeks' time. It's £195 for two. I don't know how much that is in rupees, but it's...
that is a lot. That is a lot. That's about 20,000 rupees, I guess. That's a lot.
And I live alone. It's a meal for two, so I'm going to have quite an expensive dinner. I'm very much looking forward to that.
Wow. Yeah. No, I guess that's the thing. If delivery is the flavor of the day, then that's what you're checking out. So
everyone's having to do. I was speaking to a guy. There's a little Japanese noodle chain. He said there used to be. He's the owner. He said they used to be very precious about our food. We can't deliver this and all this. And he said you just have to learn. You have to be less precious and more practical and learn how to do it. And I'm sure it's happening around the world, but certainly in London, there's so many restaurants doing delivery now who you wouldn't expect. Yeah,
no, we were in the same situation, and of course restaurants have been allowed to reopen here, but the whole idea of delivery is so different from dining in, and that it's not just a matter of packaging what you would serve in the restaurant in a delivery box, and you really have to think about it differently. So it's been quite an interesting exercise for us too, and and it still continues. People are still ordering in even though restaurants have reopened. So you can't.
Who's done well? Ravinder Bhogal, who you have.
Yes, I know. Comfort and Joy. I'm dying to try it. It looks so great.
A standout from there. And then I had a home delivery this weekend from Jamavar, Leela Hotel Group, Jamavar.
Ah.
In fact, I just had the dal this morning for my breakfast. But
Interesting. So, Richard, now we're in the last segment of the show where we want to know more about the man behind the food critic. So, tell us, what's your go-to comfort food? Is it dal for breakfast?
I would say what I call curry. So I know that's probably a term you don't use, but that's what I really, really enjoy in food. My father was born in Burma, and I've always loved the cuisine of the subcontinent. So when I was young, I used to eat. Do you know Vesta curries?
No.
They're little packets of very inauthentic food. Very, very inauthentic. I actually cooked one about a month ago, found it on the internet and bought it and thought, how did I ever eat that stuff? But
we opened a restaurant in Bombay a couple of years ago, which had sort of Burmese influences. So it definitely is one of my favorite food, but I still haven't been to Burma, in all honesty. So I don't know how authentic or not it was, but it tasted good. Whatever it is. There's one in isn't La Pet in East London? Isn't that, or is that Vietnamese? I thought that was Burmese actually. Have you heard of it?
I don't know. I haven't been there. I'm going to look at it while I'm speaking to you, but I haven't.
It's no, check it out. I think it's near Brick Lane, maybe.
Yeah, I found it. Yeah. I haven't been there yet, I have to confess.
Okay. Well, because I remember coming across it when we were sort of thinking of where to go in London, and I never made it there. But anyway.
Otherwise, Chinese food for me. I absolutely love anything Chinese from a simple takeaway. Not English.
I've read that most of your most memorable dining experience was at El Bulli. What has been your worst dining experience? And you get extra points for naming the restaurant. I'm just kidding.
Very easy to name. I'm sorry to keep going on about Indian to you because you don't need to talk about Indian food. But I went to a place in Peru called Kama Sutra.
Oh my God! God. Okay.
What a great name for a restaurant. What a great name. I still think if I ever open a restaurant, it will be Kama Sutra. The food was disgusting. And I had something similar in Rio as well. I went for a holiday there, had all kinds of nice food, and went to an Indian. I just never tasted anything as bad as that.
If not a food critic, what would you be?
Well, I used to work for the railways. But not as a gap year job. When I left school, I went to work for the railways.
Wow, as what?
As a announcer at Oxford Station. I love trains, so something in trains. Other than that, I think I'd like to be a diplomat. Not because I'm diplomatic. In fact, I'm quite undiplomatic. But I love living abroad. And I think if I had a kid, I don't have any kids, sadly, and I'm unlikely to have them now. I would recommend that as a career. Don't you think it'd be a great one to
It
travel
is, actually. But, I'm always jealous of diplomats because I'm like, oh, they have such a great life and they get to like travel all over the world and all of that. But I wonder sometimes if it's quite disruptive, in some sense. And
well, I will never know.
Yeah. The best book you've read recently?
Wuthering Heights.
Did you just reread it?
I've just read it. I've never read it before, and I really enjoyed it. I'm trying to read things I haven't read before. There's also a British author, a contemporary British author, a guy called Mick Heron. Nobody had heard of him, and I'd started to like him. I've been reading him for about a year. In fact, I've read most of his books, and he's got a new one out, and he's very good. Spy fiction, a bit like John le Carré.
Interesting.
Not cookbooks. I mean, I do look at cookbooks, but no. I'm not going to say Kitchen Confidential.
You don't have to say the politically correct.
Yeah, I'm not saying Kitchen Confidential. No.
Any rising stars in the culinary world we should be looking forward to?
Any culinary stars coming up? There's a chef I like a lot, a guy called Ben Murphy at Launceston Place in London. Mm-hmm. Just a mystery to me how he hasn't got a Michelin star. Everybody thought he'd get it this time. I'd like to say a woman chef, but I have to say this is the guy I've got my eye on mainly. Ben
Murphy. Okay, well, we're going to look out for him for sure. Well, Richard, listen, thank you so much. This has been really fun, and thank you for all your honesty and humor and candor. So I will definitely be in touch with you and let you know as soon as this episode is out. But thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Harry. I hope I can see you soon in Mumbai or in London.
Hope so.
All right.
Take care. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Richard today. It was great to hear his insights on what he looks for as a food critic in restaurants when he's dining there, as well as his tips for budding food critics. And of course, his candid honesty about what he thinks on awards. And if you like this show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM Podcast Network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcasts app or website or wherever else you get your podcasts from. You can also follow us on social media. We're at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm at gdevidyal on Instagram and at Gory Details on Twitter.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Storytel and thewholetruthfoods.com. So, great week on the network. Number of really, really interesting shows for you guys to check out. Here are a couple of the ones that I would like to highlight for you. Check out This Round Is On Me. Gauri Devi Dayal talks to her husband Jay Yusuf about mixing business and pleasure. They're the husband and wife business partners at Food Matters Company. Give it a shot. Really fun show. On Naan Curry, they speak about chaat, the queen of the street foods. A fun episode. They canvass the beauty and romance of street food, its cultural importance in a city, and they also discuss the unfortunate harassment that street vendors sometimes go through. On Paisa Vaisa, we had Madhuchanda. They joined Anupam talking about the budget and the different aspects of it. Storytellers and Storytellers feature Shreyansh Pandey, creator of Kulak, a great conversation and some interesting insights into facilitating and nurturing writers. Do check that out. On Thale Harate, the Kannada podcast, Mansi Prasad spoke to Pawan Srinath about the history and appreciation of Indian music. It's a really interesting conversation. They discuss classical music and how it evolved in India, what are the various musical instruments and how they developed. Really, really fun, interesting stuff. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
If you love cricket, listen up. The Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast is here for you. Hosted by DJ, Varun, and me, Ashwin, we bring a fun, fresh fan's point of view to talking all things cricket. Sometimes it's just the three of us, sometimes we have guests, including current and former international cricketers. For new episodes every week, check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast on the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Want to learn something new and have a few minutes to spare? Well, then go for the Traveling Professor's Diary, where I, Siddharth Deshmukh, the traveling professor, will help you glean from all the insights that I've gained from wherever I've traveled, learned, taught, and repeated. Join me every Tuesday and Thursday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.